So, thank you everybody for joining today for our topic on mastering CX complexity, focusing on automation AI in the finance and insurance space. We're obviously having a really great fireside conversation with two folks that are leaders in this industry, with Todd and Andrew. And so we look forward to having a really provocative dialogue. And so for today's agenda, we're going to do some brief introductions. Then we'll jump right into the topics everybody wants to hear. And after the conversation, everybody will get a recording of this conversation. Um, Logistically, if you have any questions for any of the speakers for Todd and Andrew, please share that in the chat, and we'll have a Q&A at the end of the session. We're also going to have a drawing for a $250 dinner or lunch on us for your attendance. So again, thank you everybody. So, a quick intro before we jump right in. Obviously, my name is Pete Lee. I'm a CRO at Zingtree. I've been in the CX space for about 15 years, and especially around automation AI, coming from speech analytics and other platforms. And we're joined by two folks who I'm really excited to talk to, two folks that I've had very engaging dialogues with, Todd Sale and Andrew Smith. So I'm going to hand it over to them for a quick intro. Todd, we'll start with you.
Sure. So, Todd Sale, I see you have 20 years of leading at customer experience complexity. I've been supporting customers or associates that support customers for over 30 years. I do have the pleasure of working with Corpay now for almost 20 of those years. And today I lead a customer experience operations team that spans from everything from back office work to direct care and servicing, even retention, and all the things in between.
In fact, Todd, you're visiting some team members in Mexico today. If
I
I know,
am. One of my favorite things to do is to get out into the operations where the action's happening. And right after this, we're going to do some town halls and do some recognition and such. So yeah, this isn't my normal office, but I do love to get out in the field.
that's great. And today is truly a global experience. We're also joined by Andrew Smith out in the UK. Andrew, a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Good. I was going to say good evening, everybody, but I think it's good morning. Good evening for me. Good evening to
We
most of
do
you.
have some good evening. This is a global
Oh,
fireside.
good, good. Good day, everybody. I am Andrew Smith. I am the head of customer outcomes at a UK insurer called First Central. We are about 1.5 million customers strong, and my role. I actually met Pete when I was in a slightly different role at First Central. I ran our customer contact operations on the retail side, and that was the driver. Is we had a lot of pain points on that side for our 3 million contacts a year that we needed to solve for. I've since moved into the head of customer outcomes role, which is a pretty broad title, but we essentially oversee all of the operational areas and customer contact and assure that we are delivering the outcomes and the service that we expect as First Central. And if anything, Zingtree, since I moved into that role, has taken on an even more important role because it's not just focused on what it is that we're using it for in the retail operation, but it's also across our claims divisions, our counter fraud divisions, even into our complaints teams as well. So hopefully, I'll be able to contribute some interesting stuff to the chat today.
And Andrew, for us uneducated folks in the U.S. who view London as the only city in the UK, where are you actually at? Where is the company based out of, and where are you actually
Yeah,
at?
so the company has two bases. The primary one is I'll tell people Haywards Heath and they can Google it if they want to. Pete has had the pleasure of coming to Haywards Heath. It's near a city called Brighton, and our other primary headquarters is people may have heard of it primarily if they're a fan of soccer slash football, depending on where you're from in the globe. Manchester, which is where I actually used to live, and I came down here since moving to First Central.
Awesome, guys. Thanks for the intro and thanks for participating. We look forward to a eventful dialogue. Um, so we'll jump right in. I know, obviously, being leaders in your businesses, there's a lot of different pressures sort of driving, digital transformation and forcing CX transformation, right? Obviously, competitive pressures, macro conditions in the market. Maybe talk a little bit about what are the main pressures facing you guys in having to drive more automation in your line of work? And Todd, we'll start with you.
Sure. So everything you have listed there, competition, cost, churn, all those things impact us as a payments business. We're a little unique in that we clearly have customers, but then we also have the suppliers that our customers, ask us to support. So we have a little bit of a complexity in our servicing model just in how we go to business. And what I would argue our biggest kind of challenge or pressure is just delivering exceptional service in a complex environment. So not only is our business model complex, but we're a company of acquisitions. And with each acquisition, it's great because you inherit best practices and new technology, but it adds complexity to the servicing teams and the back office teams. The other thing, and I would actually put this equally as challenging for us, is speed of change. We're finding so many opportunities that it's like, man, there's another opportunity. Now we got to go operationalize that. And we put our associates through a tremendous amount of change. So I would say that's super tough for us. And then finally, despite us, aspiring to have a consistent business process that is scalable and reliable, the reality is our customers, our suppliers need us to be more specialized in certain situations. So you have the complexity that kind of layers on itself, a complex business model, complexity of change, and then complexity of specialization, because that's what our suppliers, our customers, our cardholders demand.
Got it. So really like kind of summarizing that is really keeping your associates at the front lines of being able to handle that specialization and complexity while they're still human and not overburdening them with the realities of the situation.
They are human, and by nature humans have a certain capacity for memory, have a certain capacity for retaining information. So the more you can do for them, in front of them, in real time, I mean, that's kind of the secret sauce, I think, that really is foundational to transformation.
Yeah, we'll definitely dig into that a little bit further. And Andrew, from your perspective, as you're dealing with customer outcomes, what are some of the biggest drivers for transformation in your world?
But there are two big ones for First Central. And the first is that, and again, being a global audience, I know that the regulatory pressures will differ across the landscape. We're regulated from a conduct perspective by the FCA, and in July 2023, they dropped the biggest piece of customer friendly regulation in UK financial services history. It's called the Consumer Duty. And previously, there was some pretty solid regulation governing how we had to treat our customers. And the implementation of the Consumer Duty lifted that bar, not just a little bit, but in a very, very meaningful way. And it's redefined what it means to provide, I'd say, good service, but it's redefined what even permissible or acceptable service looks like. And the old ways of contact centers no longer fit in alignment with what the FCA have set out. And what that's meant for First Central is we've had to up our game. And to up our game, we've needed to do things like look at all of our processes, our flows, our scripting, and it's why we landed on Zingtree. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that. One of the other things that's put a huge amount of pressure on our business in terms of upping the quality of the customer experience is we operate in a market. It's quite rare as a market in general, but in financial services, it's a standout. The most UK customers purchase their insurance through an aggregator website, where a price comparison website, whatever it is called, around the geographies that people are watching. And the way that works here for us is the information, when you put your information in, you've got this car, this many years you've been driving, where you live, and so on. You get presented with a perfect grid, identical in comparison, to say this person will charge this much, and these are the exact features you'll get. This person will charge this much, and the the competitiveness on price is so razor sharp, it is so thin that customer experience has to become a differentiator because everyone is competing with incredibly similar prices for a given risk appetite or risk footprint. And we are no different. So we have to win elsewhere because we're all competing just as fiercely on price. And as a consequence of that, things like churn are hugely expensive to us and any other insurer out in the market. And retention, gone are the days where larger insurers, and we're not one of them, can rely on a very, very loyal back book of customers. The customer experience has moved into the center, not just because of the regulatory pressures, but also because it's the only way to win now when the price comparison websites, the aggregators have so much information symmetry, making it almost impossible to compete because everyone is pricing in a really similar way.
Yeah, it's interesting. We have such a, if you think back to when we started, Andrew, our stakeholders are more informed than they've ever been, right? So in your case, you have the perfect grid of your options. In our case, our suppliers, our customers, our cardholders are super informed, right? And so it does put pressure, and you're right on it. It puts pressure on customer experience. You don't really have much leeway, maybe that we did 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Mm. Yeah,
So,
and one
so
of the other things, like in financial services, you could get by on poor customer experience because e-commerce online was not. These days, there used to be an attitude probably 10 years ago when I was in retail banking that the customer experience didn't need to be as good as what it was like on Amazon. Now our customers don't care that they're interacting with an insurer. They
That's right.
are they're transacting through e-commerce and they expect it to be just as good. And
I
if it
agree.
isn't, then you start to you start to look pretty poor by comparison, and that's driven a lot of our push towards the customer experience.
that's a great point. The customer experience comparison is not to another of your competitors, it's actually to the broader market, right? It's the experience they have with the best experience products out there, whether it's e-com, whether it's any other type of platforms that are very focused on customer centricity. Just talking about that, right? So obviously, again, can't differentiate on price. Your consumers are more educated. What are some of the more tactical things that you're doing to win the retention, the acquisition, or the churn battle, right? If you guys can maybe share some of those tactics.
Yeah, sure. Todd, do you want to lead off?
So I'm sorry, the question is, what are we doing to kind of hedge against those things we just discussed?
Yeah, so obviously it's harder to win on price, and your consumers are more
Yeah.
educated, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the basics have to be spot on. That's just foundational. And sadly, in a complex environment, sometimes the basics are really hard. So that is a focus. You have to excel there. We strive to be as proactive as we can and head off problems, which is, it sounds great when you say it and you put it on paper. It's really hard to deliver, but we have found pockets where we can proactively prevent issues and or educate our stakeholders on, maybe potentially some fraud that was about to happen or some fraud that we deflected. Those kinds of things make us super valuable to our clients and to our suppliers. And it's funny because those things that make us so valuable also create friction, right?
Mm.
So we're learning, we've getting better at how do you take that friction and make it purposeful so that it's really not perceived as, hey, you're just hard to work with. Instead, you're viewed as, look, this is a very secure, safe, appropriate handling of a very delicate and a high risk transaction. We move money and we move a lot of money. And there's bad actors that want to get in the middle of that. So that's where I think we've really sort of leaned in to, create that value proposition and that customer experience differentiation.
Awesome. Andrew, anything to share to that?
No, I think Todd's spot on. The the most important thing for us is that we are delivering seamless value and from the basics, which I think probably a lot of people on here will have nodded when Todd said that sometimes the basics are hard to get right. That sometimes they're irritatingly hard to get right. And if I think about, if I want to tie it to Zingtree, when I was in the retail operation, I looked at how we ran our contact center. We had one of the most fundamental basic parts of our business totally wrong, which was how we actually guided the people who were speaking to our customers through the contact. We had it, it it seemed like such a simple thing, and the change that has taken place since we started to do that basic right has been sizable. So I just want to probably dwell on and emphasize that point because I think it
It
sings for a lot of us on here.
it is a little sad. We've done this a long time and we're still talking about getting the basics right. But I agree. I'm certain this rings true for many of us.
No, thank you for that. Yeah, so yeah, we'll have a quick poll. Love to engage the audience on, what are some of the pressures, and we'll give you guys about 20 seconds to enter the poll question and see the response. And I'm sure if there was a all of the above button that everybody would click on all of the.
Like, do you only get to pick one, Pete?
Yeah.
That's not very fair.
Yeah, I thought that I was. If you'd be hard pressed to choose one, I'm sad I can't vote, but
I
as
know
a
I tried to vote. It wouldn't let me.
no.
No, we don't want you guys to bias the polls. Try to keep
I
this as
think we kind of answered the question before the poll came out, so I think we've biased it already.
yeah. This is great. And so I'll end the poll now. Um, but I think the two that jump to the top is customer churn NPS concerns, and then secondly is um, internal efficiency mandates, right? And so I think we even talked about like some of those things may even be counter to each other, right? One, you're trying to make sure you follow internal compliances. And the other side is obviously making sure that you're keeping your customers happy, right? And without creating that friction. So yeah, let's jump on to the next topic. So we're gonna talk a little bit on the Gartner hype cycle a little bit. Really like where our company's at in the automation AI curve, right? And this is with any technology, and I'm sure Todd and Andrew, you guys have seen this, right? Where something comes out like a GPT or AI or automation, there's always this huge expectation of like leveraging it in your organization. And then reality sets in. We got to get through compliance. We got to make sure it works properly. And so there's a disillusionment, right? But then ultimately people settle on probably the right processes to move forward. And I think as two companies that you guys are representing in highly regulatory space, you guys are definitely not first movers to jump into new technology. You guys have to be very cautious. At the same time, you also want to be ahead of your competitors, right? So Todd and Andrew, maybe Andrew, I'll start with you first. Where are you guys at in I guess in the maturity journey of automation AI?
So as someone who works at First Central and has been, I'm not embarrassed to say that the latest wave of emerging technology, large language models, GPT models, I'm not embarrassed to say I was one of the excited people jumping up and down at the start, and I faced into personally at First Central a lot of individuals who said there was too much hype and not enough substance to it. Now, I think we can all agree that's I've been on the right side of the recent history there. Now, I will qualify that a lot of the hype was because many businesses, and I'm hoping this lands with everyone, just chucked AI on top of their existing product instead of thinking, how do I use this new technology to make my product better? They just kind of launched it on top, hoped it sold, and that did, in my opinion, drove a lot of the dissent because people were using existing partners, existing suppliers who'd dropped an OpenAI API onto their existing product and said, "Look, we've got AI now." Now we've moved past that, and a lot of businesses have developed products that are starting to really properly stick. And in doing that, First Central have been able to, we are not first movers, but we are definitely early movers. And I'd be it would be fair to say that I'm proud of where we're at as a business in a regulated environment as we are, that right now, as it stands, we are using large language models to assess every single call that hits our contact center. We're using large language models to contain queries in our voice channel. So when a customer calls us, we've integrated an LLM into our FAQ platform. We've integrated it into components of our policy administration platform, and that's allowing them to get immediate service on their terms, whether our contact center is open or closed. If they want to call us at 2 a.m. and they've got a query that fits within that remit, they can. And we're not just using the large language models and the additional technologies in and around to deliver on the front line. I appreciate a lot of the focus here is on customer experience, but we're also using it to better colleague experience. And we are we're pressing ahead with an open mind, a cautious attitude and an open mind, and we are definitely on the slope of enlightenment, to refer to this chart. And we have, as a business, crowded out any noise around the hype cycle because it's very clear, almost 3 years on now, that the hype is more than real.
Got it. Yeah, Todd, I know your business operates a little bit differently. You guys are global plus have different restrictions you're dealing with, right? Where are you guys at in the hype cycle or in the maturity curve?
Yeah, I think I just like Andrew, I was on the super hype side when I first started to really appreciate and understand what this technology could do. And we are definitely on the slope of enlightenment. We are close to getting some real traction on some meaningful programs that will leverage large language models and automation kind of taken to the next level. We've had automation for many years, but very narrow pockets where there was super high velocity and what I would think of as very linear and simple business rules. It's exciting then to, we're going to keep that because that has incredible value. It works great, but then layer in those edge cases that before you said, oh, that's an edge case. I'll just give that to a human and they'll be able to somehow manage the crazy edge case. The reality is then they're just working on all edge cases, which is a tough job. But we think we can start to knock some of those edge cases down and certainly help our associates get to answers quickly, with just better tools.
Yeah, just to add on to this question. So again, thanks for that insight. Obviously, I think there's one side of bringing the business along. I think the other side is you guys are also dealing with a lot of associates and team members, right? Team members that have a wide variety of skill sets, some internal, some outsourced. How do you bring them along, right? Because you need them to be able to adopt to this thought process and technology. So I know, Todd, this is a topic near and dear to you, but like, how do you
Yeah.
make sure that you can bring your associates along as part of this journey?
I would not say we're the poster child of exceptional change management. I've probably pushed my team to move too fast. And as a result, on some things we moved too fast. Associates didn't really come along with us, and you don't get the great results that you expect. Or you just don't get the insights. They really kind of mess things up. So we're learning to be more thoughtful, bring the associates in earlier. And we're finally getting to a point now where it's not just change, it's actually makes their job easier, gives them greater tools, gets them to a solution faster. Nothing's worse. Imagine, I started my career taking phone calls for a large retailer. And there's nothing worse than you can't help the person on the other end, whether it's through a digital channel or voice. It's tough to put our associates through that. So the more that we, can help them in the moment, I think that will sort of like gravity pull people forward too.
Yeah, Andrew?
Yeah,
You're, 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 I've seen you personally push your team really, really fast and really hard, right? So I'm sure you're dealing with this is how do you bring the people along?
yeah, Sometimes Todd stole my favorite point when it comes to this question, which is that when it is clear why the benefit is to the individual, the change suddenly clicks and makes a lot more sense. Sometimes change can be positioned, and often it's positioned as happening to people, and people don't like it when things are happening to them. When they're, like Todd said, when there's an element of being on the journey and understanding why. I always like to try, when Peter's right, it would be unfair if I didn't confess to driving change very aggressively. But the thing that I try to do alongside that seems to work better than just throwing it at people is explaining the why behind it. And usually the why, I don't know about you guys, but we don't tend to do stuff because we think it's a bad idea. We tend to try and drive stuff because we think it's going to be better for the colleague and better for the customer. And if that is true, if that holds true, and you can explain that to the individuals, you can bring them on the journey far more quickly than you can if you just say, look, you've got this new shiny tool.
That's
Got
right.
it. Got it. No, thanks for that. It's it's showing them why they got to eat their vegetables and the outcomes of eating the vegetables. But then, it's just it's a necessity, but it can also make their lives easier. And it's just thinking about your associates as being a culture that drives them to allow them to perform the best as they can in this very hard environment. So we'll turn over to the second poll, which is love to understand from the audience where's your org in the maturity curve. So we'll give it another 30 seconds. And I understand from the chat that people can enter more than one, so there is a multiple choice if you need.
Yeah, I was doing the math on the last one and I'm like, it doesn't quite work. But
I was doing it and more surprised at how evenly spread the answers were, and I'd realized people had obviously been um
yeah,
Well, that I think the first question is definitely multiple choice. There's not probably one
yeah,
answer
this
to.
is single.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is
Now this
single.
one is probably more single related, and it sounds like just from the poll so far, people are definitely more cautious. But I'll end the poll right now, and then we'll share the results. So I think the folks here are mostly testing, right? So I think early in the journey, probably just the same as you both, right? You guys probably well, there's that initial fad or initial hype, um, some disillusionment, but now you're starting to test in very specific use cases that can drive the right outcomes for the team versus like jumping right in.
Yeah.
Um,
yeah. And Pete, if you ever meet someone who's plateaued and needs a refresh, I'd like to meet them.
Oh yeah, we need whatever the next new hot technology you know to come in.
Exactly.
Um, awesome. So now we jump a little bit into risk, right? So we talked a little bit about the journey. We talked a little bit about transformation. Now we jump into really like what is the constraints on the journey, right? So what are the biggest risk in applying AI to customer experience, operations, and teams? Obviously, we all have experienced personal chat GPT, the hallucinations and dead ends. Obviously, there are regulatory measures, right? But love to understand what is some of the risks for you guys when you guys enter this journey and maybe some ways to overcome it with your InfoSec team. So, Todd, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, for us, the consequences of getting something wrong has a super real impact of money, right? We move money. We're a payments company. So to give you an idea of how serious we take getting this stuff right, is we are deploying internal tools to help an associate get to an answer quicker. And we're doing incredible rigor on asking it questions and with a human reviewing the answers. And um, I don't know that we'll always do that rigor, but I can tell you to get started, it's something on the order of we're asking it's 500 different questions and seeing what the answer is, just to make sure that we're educating our associate the right way. So that's pretty conservative, right? We obviously have the compliance gaps, and I don't want to take anything away of how important customer experience is to retention and to growth, because clearly it is. But where I think about risk, it's just getting something wrong could, uh, make a bad actor very happy. It could, something could slip through, and bad actors are super bad for our business and our customers and our suppliers. Or it could just be like a monster headache that we don't want to put anybody through when we get something wrong. So that's where I think of the risks for us.
Got it. Andrew?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's not on here, and I'll talk some of the stuff relevant to us that is, one of the risks for us at the moment in leveraging AI is that we've had to work around it and build up to is the financial risk, not necessarily of getting it wrong per se, but sinking the organization's effort and money into products and services that do not have proven track records of delivering benefit. It's most businesses, you go and you can procure something and they can say we've got 15 years, 20 years of this product evolving with these predictable benefits that if you come with us and you do it right, we know you're going to get this there or thereabouts. With generative AI, you've got people who've been doing it for 12 months and you can say, well, that person got 50%, gain on their margin. That person had 300% ROI, but the data, the track records are all still building. And the other thing is they're not just building, but the technology is advancing so quickly that benefits cases from 12 months ago are probably a fraction of what they might be if you implemented it today. And that leads me to the point around the risk that I focus on the most because we are heavily regulated. A bit like Todd, we cannot afford for generative AI to be giving incorrect information to customers or getting anything wrong. And what we've tried to do as a business is respect where the technology is up to on its journey, because the risk of hallucination 30 months ago versus today, depending on the parameters and the fine tuning and the guardrails, is significantly reduced for some stuff. But I think if anyone saw Apple's research paper, give it a puzzle that it's never seen before, and its accuracy will fall to zero. And what we're trying to do in First Central is gain as comprehensive an understanding as we can as to the sweet spot of the product and the service for where the technology is at today and remain alive to the fact it is leaping on bounds every 3 to 6 months and therefore revisiting stuff we might have otherwise dismissed as something non-viable 12 months ago that is now not just viable but highly viable because of the development of either the underlying large language models or the controls that can be placed on top of it.
So I guess just a follow-on question, just to be more tactical. How do you guys navigate with your CISO or your InfoSec to balance the risk while you still need to drive forward with obviously, what you guys business outcomes, right? So how do you balance that and work with your CISO?
So I've in my role in the retail operation, I was the first person in our business to push a large language model use case that had anything to do with the customer. And the way I positioned it internally, firstly, I have to give a lot of credit to our InfoSec, our DPO, our data director, head of AI, and so on, because they were not like a lot of people may have to endure, which is they were not there to say no to us. They were there to say, here are the risks, and let's figure out a way to navigate them together. Now, that might have put me into a privileged position, but what we did was build our appetite and build our confidence slowly. We started off with a use case that felt like it had value, which was to bring it to life. We transcribed thousands and thousands of calls and then used large language models to create sentiment analysis out the back of it. Now, the risk of hallucination there is almost non-existent because it's entirely back office facing. We're able to spot check the data and understand the results. And then when that went well, we moved into something that had slightly more risk, but not substantially more. And that was a large language model listening in when the customer provided the identity and verification details in the voice platform. So we had a problem with the NLU bot where if a customer was halfway through a conversation, they realized they'd been asked to give their date of birth, then our U-bot would panic and it would get it wrong because it didn't know which part was about what was in the fridge and which part was about the vehicle registration. So we put an LLM bot in there. There's no generative AI there. There's no risk of hallucination. The worst thing that happens is it still gets it wrong. So again, we layered on top, and then we did, well, can it listen to a request and reason over our FAQs and play the answer back if the answer is there? Yes, we can. That's live now too. And we've been going step by step by step to build our confidence and understand how the customers respond to it. Because the last thing you want to do is spend a fortune developing a bells and whistles, singing, dancing voice bot that can be conversationally, artificially intelligent and integrated into your CRM, only for the customer to hate it. So we've been layering in, so building confidence from a business perspective, but also building the confidence from the customer perspective as well, and doing that with a really tight governance process around it, that factored in all of the stakeholders you would want to be involved with tests and validation and approvals through to where we are today.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Uh,
While we launch the poll, but Todd, share whatever.
Sure, just real quick, because we're early on that maturity curve, we can be thoughtful about the use cases we put up for evaluation. So if it's a high risk PII, PCI, you name it, we're kind of putting that on the shelf. Well, then that plus we're bringing our InfoSec team in early, and I like the Andrew terminology. We kind of have privileged, support. When you don't surprise them and you bring them in early, it's surprising how they're very supportive of driving meaningful business outcomes, but you don't want to surprise them with something bad. Then all of a sudden, that's the no machine, right?
Right, right. Awesome. We'll have our last poll where, again, what are your biggest concerns with implementing AI? So we'll give it about 30 seconds, and just for time check, want to get people out the door at 15 before the hour. So we'll kind of fly through this.
Interesting. Actually no, my answer would probably be lack of oversight control. Mine is the explainability of the model's results. Because the
Well,
more complex stuff that it takes on, the more we actually let it use generative AI, the more I'll start to. I don't worry about it choosing an answer to an FAQ, but when we start doing some of the more interesting stuff down the line, we need to make sure that the explainability and the transparency of the model is well understood.
Yeah. You didn't ask me, Pete, but I would go with integration complexity. That'd be my answer
yeah.
if I had to do one.
So I've noticed as you guys are bringing it up, those numbers spiked. So there's definitely a back.
Oh,
Look
I
at you
don't
I'm
guys
sorry.
back to the
I'm
poll, but
sorry.
I would say so. We'll end the poll, but inaccurate hallucinations. I think that's still in our minds. In 2024, dictionary.com, hallucination was the word of the year, right? So I think that's still in the back of our mind. But what is hallucination caused by? Lack of oversight, integration challenges, where it's not getting to the source of truth, right? So, um, awesome. So we'll go to the last two topics. So the next question is, so Andrew and Todd, so obviously you guys talked about some of these use cases where automation can drive the most impact. Andrew, you talked about your voice bot side, right, and being able to create that. Maybe quickly talk about some of the areas where the use cases for automation is driving the most impact in your line of work.
Yeah, Todd, could you go first? My camera just died
Yeah,
again.
I 100%. So we love the automation where it's hands off, and we have some really great success processing payments, for example, back office processing. Where I think we have the greatest, call it in that early part of the maturity curve, is guided AI with human in the loop because it allows us, I think, to go deeper faster with this backstop and safety net that we're all very comfortable with a human. And in theory, we can add greater value to our suppliers and our customers because this human is more like a superhuman, right? I
Right.
think of it like my best associate who has had the greatest tenure on their best day. Like should be able to do that at scale, right?
Yeah, Andrew, your thoughts?
Yeah. Uh, I mean, well, when I look at this, the we are trying to take AI and put it where the value is highest. Now, when I say value, I don't just mean necessarily the financial value, but I mean the value of getting stuff right. So when Todd was talking about human in the loop, the focus there has been on trying to leverage this technology to support the human in the stuff that's really hard for them to do to make it easier for them. And in making it easier for them, like, well, as it says here, judgment heavy issues, if you enhance their ability to make that judgment safely, not only is that role going to feel like less pressure, but it's also going to lead to a better customer outcome. Now, my personal focus in my previous role in the retail operation was more on the AI automation at the front end. How many people could I provide good service to without needing to graduate them into a more costly contact center? Where I'm at today in the customer outcomes role, which sits across and has a slightly different, maybe less commercial focus, is very much on how we can use some of the guided AI and rules-based automation to provide far greater oversight and assurance as to what it is that's happening, not just from a customer experience perspective, but from a regulatory perspective and indeed from a commercial perspective.
No, that makes sense. I think the summary of that is I think the hype is around fully autonomous, just like autonomous cars. But the truth is, you need the right approach for each individual use case. And in some cases, right, the right use case is to augment the humans to make sure they're providing the final judgment of the AI. And then the other is, maybe you don't even need AI and to have a full automation that's rule-based, like for highly compliant, highly risk heavy fraud investigation type work, right? So I think the answer is definitely like a more of a hybrid approach
Yeah.
to rather than a one size fit all. Just to jump into the last topic. Uh, I guess want to maybe understand from both of you guys, right? How do you guys start the transformation journey? So I'm sure there are folks out here that are on this chat that are, just starting the journey, right? I've heard you guys form AI committees. You guys obviously, want to create ways to be able to evaluate certain vendors. Like, how do you guys start the journey? I always use the analysis that it's just like investments, right? With AI, if you're starting now, you're probably a little bit too late, but it's never too late to start, right? So, how do you guys start the journey, and kind of get the teams going?
Todd, do you want to go?
Yeah, well, I sound a little bit like a broken record, but because we're on the early side of that maturity curve, you start small with high value and you start to get some wins. And less is more, I think, when you get started. And there's a lot of pressure from around us to do the big magic. Everything is,
Save
sunshine,
money, save money, save money,
yeah,
right?
save money, big money, unicorns and rainbows, and gigantic reductions of labor. It just doesn't work that way. You've got to start small with a very narrow focus, and then start working off success from that.
Andrew?
Yeah, the I'm not gonna if Todd and I ever do this again, I'm gonna try and go first each time because he's taken my favorite point twice now. The we started small, but we started like
Correct.
the important thing for us was there was a lot of fear, there was a lot of hesitation, there was a lot of is the hype real? And to instead of trying to create believers out of every single person by creating some sort of magic AI bot that was going to solve all of our problems, we said, what is something that we have a really high degree of confidence that we know it can solve that isn't going to take, it's not going to distract three of our change teams and occupy one of our infosec guys for a month just to get it over the line. We thought, what is something that we're really confident is going to be able to leverage the value of this capability? Not because we just want to use it because it's new, because it's going to be a better version of what it is that we were using before. And in doing that, we started to gain the traction and the momentum. And there's a reality that if we go right back to what I said earlier, when people understand why you're doing it, and they understand the answer isn't, in my case, because Andrew's seen something shiny, when they know you're doing it for a sensible reason. That's going to have financial benefit, commercial benefit. It's going to have risk benefit as well in a number of the cases that we're working on. The path is paved for something bigger. So when people ask me how we started, I said we started small, but we started, and it snowballed from there.
Yeah, awesome. And I'm just noticing time. Time is flying. Obviously with I think this great dialogue, we're just getting to the end of this conversation. So we're going to open up to a quick Q&A. So if there's anybody post questions in the chat, and as we're receiving them, we'll maybe ask Todd and Andrew a couple questions. Um, but I guess maybe I'll just start with for Todd and Andrew, right? Like based on your learnings now, and probably been through a lot of learnings and fires and mistakes. So, like, what would you do differently based on what you guys have learned today from a couple of years ago of trying to jump into this journey?
I'll go, maybe I won't take Andrew's best answer. I would manage the change management differently, and I probably would have gone slower to go faster. It's the people change component that I think we could have done a better job of. That'd be my.
Hmm. So, so a couple of good questions already in there. Thankfully, my answer is not that because I actually probably would have pushed even faster. We started really conservatively, and we have done an incredible job of moving more quickly as we've gained that confidence. The I'm really struggling to think of something we would have necessarily done differently that would have. I suppose the reason I'm struggling is I wish we were further along, even though we're actually quite far along, and I'm struggling to. Uh, I'm gonna just try and distract you, Pete, with the fact that good questions have been put in the chat.
Yeah, yeah. So why don't we jump into that question? So I think Andrew, we'll put you on the spot, right? So
hmm
obviously, I think the first is a great question. If you're a smaller business and you don't have all the resources and you don't want to jump with the huge investments, how would you even get started?
Yeah, well, I suppose I'd be interested to understand a little bit more about why it would need to be a huge investment. Some of the technologies that we're talking about are accessible at quite an impressive price point if you are willing to go either, if you think about an API into OpenAI to start leveraging some of ChatGPT's capabilities, that is remarkably cost efficient. There are use cases aplenty that we're working on in-house that are being developed by some of our colleagues using something as I'll say straightforward. Obviously, the underlying technology is far from straightforward, but in terms of gaining access to the technology and being able to start using it effectively, the investment doesn't need to be huge. And I suppose if I take you back to my previous answer, my previous proper answer, we started small and the investment was it wasn't even in five figures, it was four figures. And we derived a huge amount of value out of that. And I suppose as a small business, the opportunity cost is always there. I hesitate to guess that if anything, in a small business, it's the management bandwidth that's going to cost more
Right.
than the actual
That's,
technology to test.
I agree, but you need to keep shopping if the only things you're finding are super expensive things. That's what I would
100%.
say.
So Todd, we'll let you have the last question. So do you have some tangible examples on how the right change management can benefit your associates? I think that the question driven at some of the conversations you had earlier.
Yeah, so our early use cases didn't really help our associates. I'll be the first to admit that. And instead, it was the latter use cases that started to help our associates. So I think if I could do things differently, I would have inversed that. I would have maybe found use cases that helped our associates so that the change management was like kind of like running downhill and then followed up with the things that drove business value. Um, that's a lesson learned.
Yeah. Well, Todd and Andrew, this has been great. I know we're a little bit past time, but just wanted to kind of close it out. Thank you both for joining us. This is obviously a great conversation. Feel free to, I think a couple of things, right? Post this. We'll have a result of that dinner giveaway. Um, Feel free to reach out. We're gonna send you both the recording and also a white paper on this topic. But love to have a conversation to maybe discuss how where you guys are at in the AI automation journey and where we can see some results or brainstorm some outcomes. Obviously, I think everybody here is willing to connect to Todd and Andrew. They're both great people to connect on LinkedIn. Todd does a lot of speaking engagements, so I always follow him, and I know he recently got nominated as for one of the speaking engagement at Exec of the Year. So pay a lot of attention to that. But again, thank you everybody for attending. Todd, Andrew, you guys have been great. I'm sure we could have talked for another hour, but Andrew, it's probably close to your bedtime, so you got to start winding down in the UK. So again, thanks
Indeed.
everybody for attending. We look forward to have more of these sessions and moving forward. Thank you all.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you.